Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Emerging Pod, where we guide emerging people into emerging careers. Today's guest is Leanne Fitzpatrick. Leanne has a rich experience growing data team. She built teams for startups, SMEs, and large corporates. She's now the director of data science at the Financial Times. She's a thought leader in MLOps in the MLOps community, and most notably, she's on the AI Developers to Watch in 2023. Leanne, welcome to the pod.
Thank you so much, Sofiane. What a lovely intro. So lovely to be with you.
It's really nice to have you. So let's just jump straight into it. You studied maths and music, which we thought was really interesting. What prompted you to choose those two subjects?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I guess back then I didn't realize that I would probably have described myself as a polymath when I was in my teens, and I had a very rich, diverse set of interests. So had ended up going down a very traditional education route and had ended up with A levels in history, textiles, maths, and music. And had a strong passion for music. I used to go to a music school at a weekend and really did want to do the best of both worlds, which was to study both maths and music, which turned out to be really hard in the UK. So found out that things like joint honours degrees worked, which I guess for anyone listening in from the US thinking, what? Why can't you just take a major and a minor? And doesn't really exist like that in the UK. You've got to pick one subject, and that's you if you want to do a degree in it. And so I was lucky enough to stumble across that at Leeds. And I guess the reason why is that I've always had a big creative bone in my body. I'm left-handed as well, which probably speaks to that creativity aspect. So if I'm in my free time, I very rarely sit programming and doing things in data science. I'm not going to lie, my creative interest drives more in terms of doing some kind of sewing, singing, doing some kind of creative hobby. Previously always playing my guitar, singing, etc. So and always picking up some kind of new artsy thing to try out that I probably generally fail at. Yeah, so that's where that came from. I think it brought a lot of different opportunities for me, though did have big regrets sometimes not doing a 100% math degree when I was trying to figure out what I was going to do next.
I think the most shocking thing that you said from that is the fact that lefties are more creative. Is that real? Is that true? I didn't know that was a thing.
I just said I'm left-handed, so that might have something to do with it. I did not make that. I'm just going to caveat this. I haven't made a declaration that left-handeds are champions in creativity, but I do. I think it's that left hand, right hand side of the brain thing that apparently exists. I don't know. I'm not a neuro expert, but
We won't quote you on that one.
I know that lefties have an advantage in basketball. I didn't know they also have an advantage in the creative sector, but that's good to know.
Again, I'm not quoting any stuff. It was just thoughtful, definitely not empirical evidence. Let's just put it that way.
So you mentioned that you've felt at a disadvantage sometimes because you studied music and you didn't just fully dedicate yourself to mathematics. When did that happen?
Yeah, so at certain points, I guess, certainly when I was determining what I wanted to do next after my degree, and any kind of grad programs, a lot of them needed at least 80% of your modules to have been in mathematics. They didn't necessarily look favourably on people that kind of had gone down a more polymath or a hybrid approach. And then certainly when therefore I was looking at I did a postgraduate qualification, a master's after my maths and music degree, and I was lucky enough that I could stay on at Leeds, and I therefore took that in financial mathematics. But if I'd wanted to do it in straight maths, I would have had to go back and do some more math modules in my undergraduate degree. So very just really interesting anecdotes, things that you don't really think about until you're in your final year or you've just finished your university degree and thinking, oh wait, there's a lot of caveats here that obviously was lovely to express my creativity, and I would never change that for the world. Being able to write some great compositions during my degree and being able to write a great dissertation about the underpinning of maths behind music. yeah, it became a little bit like tenuous when I was like, what am I going to do next? And if I'd ever wanted to pursue like a fully postdoctorate route and do a PhD, it could have been a little bit difficult if I hadn't found like a master's. So yeah, it was a interesting realization afterwards. But I would say now, where I am now in the workplace, I think it's more of an interesting thing to talk about. I think I bring more flavors of things that people are like, oh, that's quite interesting. What do you do with that? And I definitely think the way my brain works, that side of that creativity that comes from music and some of that training definitely helps when you think from a problem sets from in a different way than just from maybe a very mathematical approach.
100%. The more diverse, the better. People that have different backgrounds, teams that have people with different backgrounds are generally more creative, and they can find interesting solutions to challenges. If you just have uniform people that have the same background and studied the same things, you're not really going to get too far. That's crazy. Yeah, it's interesting to see that you've kind of transcended that. So then, moving after your after studies, your first role, how did you find, what was the first role? How did you find it, and how did you manage that process?
Yeah, so I actually found my first role after doing my master's in financial mathematics, and that degree was a bit of a hybrid. I guess it was like data science before its time, because it was this kind of macro micro economics of business coupled with hardcore statistics, like 7 years of university level statistics right up to like postdoctorate, coupled with Black-Scholes algorithms, like very mathematics for finance, and then everything was evaluated in comp sci, so you had to be able to program in C++, everything you'd written in your stats and your mathematics modules. So it's just like really insane like boot camp that probably like most data science people in my field now probably go through something similar, but it didn't, data science as a master's didn't exist back then. And so coming out of that, and I'd studied in Leeds, my only options in terms of staying on that career path was to go down to London to kind of be a quant finance specialist, or I really had an appetite for business risk, and that was something I really wanted to work in. But I'd met my partner at the time, now my husband for 10 years, and we had decided to stay in Leeds. He was doing his PhD at Leeds, and so trying to find roles was really difficult. I had this like really complex masters that I didn't really understand how to apply to a non-finance sector. So I fell into a risk analyst role at a credit bureau. So for anybody that isn't aware, like credit bureaus are essentially the independent kind of mediators for all of the data that goes into a loan or decision making around your identity, that might be on a mortgage or credit application. And so I found a role doing that. And so essentially what I ended up doing was building risk models, but for customers around kind of applying for mortgages or loans or credit card applications, in a hub that then fed those to various different banks or lenders of different capacities. So that's what I did. I remember a lot of like interesting, like it was really like a learning curve doing that, but I also had a lot of interesting nights where I was like, this work is quite boring in comparison to like this like really insane, really like difficult like masters I'd done. And then I was like, I'm just applying some logistic regression models and some some decision trees to figure out what's going to happen to somebody's like whether or not somebody should or shouldn't have a credit card. And I was like, is this really like the meaning of my life? And so I was like in this existential crisis, definitely for the first year. But I kind of then settled into kind of the opportunity in that space. So I think it's really hard coming out of that like education system and going into your first role. And I think there's a lot of that like mismanagement of like what it is that people are going to do in certainly for their like first role until you kind of get into that feel for commercial businesses versus actually what you've kind of been trained or what you think you're going to be doing. I think we're getting better. And certainly like I think apprenticeships and things like that bridge some of that gap, but certainly coming out of university with quite a high level of like postdoctorate qualification, you're like, is this the right thing for me? I'm not too sure.
I can't even imagine, because you also didn't get the creative side going either. So you were just getting none of what really attracted you to math and music.
Yeah, exactly. So luckily, actually, my first year of my role, we were planning for our wedding. So like for in a couple of years' time. So what I was doing was I made all my bridesmaids dresses. So my creative outlet was all in my free time. So that was one way I did like manage that, was like, the one thing I did really enjoy was that, that blissful enjoyment that you get when you first come out of like intense education and upskilling, of having that differentiation between like the work day and then your home day, like your home time and like the weekends and things like that. And it felt really weird that there was suddenly this sacred time that I could do things that weren't like, you've got to study. And I think that's really easy to sometimes forget when you've not been studying in that kind of way for 10 plus 12 plus years. Not to say that we're not constantly learning and evolving, and I'm constantly reading things, but I feel like I have a different approach to when you're like, I've got to get this dissertation written by next week.
Yeah, in the world of work, there will always be work, so it never ends. So.
Yeah, exactly.
And then from there, you got into Hello Soda as a head of analytics. How did that opportunity came about?
Yeah, so I was really fortunate that at the time, some of the peers and some of the senior stakeholders I worked with that weren't directly in my department but knew of me at the company I was working for at the time, called Core Credit, and then subsequently is now TransUnion. Knew some of the work that I'd been doing across the business in terms of kind of thinking very differently about how we applied, credit data to different areas like the automotive industry and things like that. And they had gone off to set up a startup called Hello Soda at the time to focus on alternative data for identity verification and personalization. And I was lucky enough that they kind of reached out after setting it up to say, hey, do you want to come on this journey with us and help us build out some really interesting data capabilities? And I guess that was my first foray into realizing, there's a world where we need to be able to apply these really predictive analytical capabilities, but within an engineering stack. And that might be something called data science. And so ended up kind of building much more kind of sophisticated machine learning models on very alternative data to do identity verification right through to kind of personalization, a lot of like text analytics. Back in the day when we've come a long way in the natural language processing space. NLTK has since been very deprecated and superseded by Spacey, for example, and there was no such thing as so very different space back then, but really interesting challenges and trying to build a lot of those machine learning capabilities a lot of the time from scratch, because the open source market wasn't what it was back at the end of 2014, 2015. So that was how I stumbled into that. I think my message there is it's definitely like who you know sometimes and not what you know. And that was definitely where I leaned into my network and was lucky to kind of have established a relationship that allowed me to step into startup land.
Nice. And was it also where you got the opportunity to travel to the US and work from there?
Yeah, it was as well. So I was with Hello Soda for 6 years. So I helped develop out the data capability. So I was responsible for building the data systems, all of our machine learning capabilities, and then building a team. And so a team of data scientists, team of data engineers, and essentially therefore had an opportunity that my husband had also had an opportunity to go out and work in Austin, Texas, and I'd been to and from Austin because we had offices out there. We had a satellite, and given that I had developed a lot of the machine learning models that we used to kind of for our services, I did a lot of training with our sales staff out there. And so I was lucky enough to be able to manage my team back in the UK, but then work remotely from our Austin office for a year and a half. So I really had a great time, and before that been traveling over there a lot. And Austin is a really cool place to live and work and to see and visit if you haven't been out. Definitely the music capital of the States. Obviously Nashville is as well, but Austin is it's a really cool city, and it's a bit of a melting hub of cultures. So really, really super inclusive in this very, very red state, which surprises a lot of people. But every so often you do get to see somebody riding a horse down the middle of like Broadway. Like, what's going on?
Amongst the giant kind of Ford F-150s and pickup trucks, there's the occasional horse. Yeah, I've seen that as well.
Exactly. Like, I remember taking photos of like some of my friends' trucks, like their wheels would come to my shoulders.
Everything's bigger in Texas.
Too much. Absolutely, yeah.
Especially the food portions.
Yeah, don't get me started on barbecue, because we could take over the podcast talking about it. We actually, when we moved back here, the first investment piece we had was a low and slow smoker. So that's a regular staple in our house. So apologies for anybody that isn't a meat eater listening in, but we do a lot of grilling and slow cook. Brisket and chicken is a regular thing that happens in our house, as well as we do actually a lot of vegan options, because you can do a lot of cold smoking, as well as things like smoked cherry tomatoes and turning that into your own salsa. Food is a whole nother podcast. Texan food is a whole nother podcast episode.
And now I'm hungry.
Smoking meats. Creating this smoking meats podcast. You can host it with Mark Zuckerberg.
So just going back to then your role at Hello. So that was it there where the first time you hired data scientists as well?
Yeah, it was, and I'd love to share a bit of a funny story about that. So at the time, data science, I can't quite remember the year. I think it was 2012 or 2013, right? It was Indeed's, or Reed's, best job of the year was data scientist, and everybody was we were going through this transition then in that kind of 2014, 2015, 2016 stage, where a lot of like analyst or kind of advanced analytical roles were being transferred to the title of data scientist. And we knew our organization, the type of data challenges that we had, very, very unstructured. We were using MongoDB to kind of just dump lots and lots of data into a very unstructured, what we call now like a data lake, essentially, no structure to it. And then we were needing, because we were sourcing all this information from very different alternative sources, web analytics right through to kind of social data, and then kind of needing to do lots of advanced analysis and then predictive kind of insights on it as well, and be able to serve that in a very low latency way. So if we were to build a model that was predictive about saying, okay, this person is who they say they are, we need to not only grab all that information on that user and say, okay, this is the then apply the model to actually say, yes, this is who they say they are, in quite a short millisecond space of time. And that was all quite a new, very new field at the time in terms of the types of data we were working with. And so we were like, okay, we need data scientists, but it was still in that weird moment where we didn't really understand. There was Team Microsoft data science process, which, if anyone isn't familiar with, it's like the kind of one of the standards for how you do data science, didn't exist until October 2016. So, we were all kind of making up the methods and kind of figuring it out, and all sort of figuring it out probably at the same time. But we also didn't really therefore define what are these roles doing, and what are the skills that you bring. We had an inclination, but everybody was kind of looking at the other people's job specs and copying and pasting the best bit. And we have these periods, right, where people looking for a data scientist with 10 years commercial data science experience. You're well, the role's only been around for 2 years, so be really careful around it seems funny at the time, it was just this you used to see it on LinkedIn all the time. Somebody would be I found a new one with 15 years experience in this or funny things 5 years experience with Docker. Well, Docker, like the first version of Docker, again, didn't get released until 2016. Things like this. So, where is this stuff coming from? So, there was all that going on the backdrop of actually these are the types of roles that we know we need for the type of thing that we're trying to build as a business. And so we'd kind of put these sort of roles out for kind of data science. And I remember thinking, oh, am I a data scientist now? Is that what I do? I'm not too sure. I guess so. I'm building these predictive services and then I'm putting them into, production environments to make decisions. And these things are, alive and, the main revenue driver for our business. I think that makes me a data scientist. And, doing an interview once with a data scientist that came into the interview in a full leather jacket with sunglasses on and sat down. Very cool. I remember thinking, oh man, this person looks so cool. And he sat down and we did the interview. He never took his sunglasses off. And I remember thinking at the end of the interview, is that what I should look like? Is that a data scientist? Should I be? I don't know what I'm supposed to and it was just really interesting but chaotic time for the whole professional field because we were all just scrabbling around thinking we need these people who can do this. We don't really know we kind of know what we need people to do and the experience that they need for our business, but there was no standard, right? I'm so relieved that we'll where we are in terms of our professional market and kind of maybe the qualifications aren't still perfect, but I think there's a much better alignment of expectations. So fortunately, I don't sit around in a leather jacket with sunglasses on. I might have taken it very seriously.
Yeah, that would have been funny to see. Next day, your whole team just show up with sunglasses, leather jacket, maybe some gel in the hair as well. Although I don't think that would be a bad world to live in. If you could easily spot the different types of professions by the way they dress.
Yeah, maybe. Although back to the inclusivity thing, right? I think I would hate it if I was in a team of data scientists that all look the same. So, who knows?
Oh, that's actually a very good story. So fast forward to today. You are at the Financial Times. You're a director of data science. What does data science mean for the Financial Times? How does that look like?
Yeah, so I guess there's what my team does, and then there's what does data science mean at the FT? I guess more holistically, if we just think about what data science is, right? We're applying AI, machine learning, the subset of AI, machine learning, and then deep learning and different applications of machine learning models to different business challenges. And so within the FT for my team, specifically what we're looking at is actually, so the way the FT works is that we have a series of different the departmental groups. So we have our B2B business, we have our B2C business, we have product and tech, which is responsible for kind of supporting all of the products that we put out there, because the FT isn't just the pink newspaper. It's a variety of different products that we have out there. We have so not only just ft.com, an app and the news and the print newspaper, but we have things like FT Live, so that's our events stream. We have FT Specialists, which is a series of smaller niche published titles. We also have new product development in our professional arm. And so there's a lot going on at the FT. And then we also obviously have editorial, and so that's more the traditional editorial, the newsroom that you see that actually creates the great quality journalism that goes into print and ft.com and app. And in the newsroom, we have a fantastic data journalism and visualization team. So they kind of got they also have a data scientist, but then in my team, essentially our team is responsible for what you can think of everything that doesn't go into the publishing piece, right? So supporting the business in terms of the fact that we're a subscription organization. So right through to from like very traditional types of data science modeling. So that might be like churn propensity, next best action type models. So what's a user going to do next? It might be thinking about how do we understand the lifetime value of our users, right through to more interesting applications like contextual ads and understanding which ads to serve when on some of our ads perspective, and then right through to kind of how do we help with new product development. So how do we understand the context of our content? How does that and then potentially allow us to do things like semantic search and then build new product capabilities on top of that? So our data science team touches on kind of everything that isn't the kind of the print things that you see in print, but everything that kind of supports the FT underneath that.
That's really interesting. What do you think are some of the challenges that the FT as a effectively media organization is facing at the moment, and what do you think is the role of data science to help overcome that?
It's a very poignant, timely, and interesting question. Obviously, we're all in the AI and machine learning space at the moment, very aware of the AI buzz that we've had with ChatGPT and Bard. And I think, the expansion of generative AI and kind of large language models is a huge, great capability. Like I said, where for me to see the natural language processing space come on in such an incredible kind of pace, and for a variety of reasons, right? Not just computational capability, but for a variety of other perspectives. But what that does put us in is this like really interesting crux point where we're going through a new kind of transformational wave in machine learning. And I think, the FT's kind of view on this is, well, I wouldn't say it's the FT views, but there's certainly a media view on this, which is, we need to lean into kind of some of these capabilities, right? But you also have to be very, very cognizant and aware of what they are. So, just like your search exists right now, and that's something that we have. The web exists. Hiding away from these things isn't going to kind of enable you to kind of lean into them and to kind of develop your business. So you need to kind of be leaning into them, but you also have to be, and I'm sure we could have a whole podcast about this, but very aware of the ethical impact of such things like, specifically with ChatGPT. I don't think, hopefully, I don't want to teach anybody to suck eggs on this podcast. So, but hopefully everybody's aware that, it is very hallucinogenic. So yeah, I don't know if anybody saw the article at the weekend that was about the crocheters who asked ChatGPT to get ChatGPT to write them some crochet patterns, and essentially the ChatGPT put out these new patterns that looked exactly like a normal crochet pattern, and so looked really like great. They were like, great, okay, I've asked it to create me a narwhal pattern. And they went away and created these, did the crochet, and turns out that the things that they created looked like monsters. They said they were horrendous. So like essentially, the eyes were all out of proportion, the body shape was completely out of proportion. And I think it's a really great manifestation for people that aren't familiar with kind of the under the hoods lyings of how these models are put together. That essentially the way ChatGPT, we believe that it's been kind of trained, is that it's kind of been reinforced essentially to speak with like such confidence, even when it might be quite wrong. And that therefore is quite dangerous in terms of the way it presents fact and the way it presents kind of information, because it will be taken as fact. So kind of goes without saying, you ask it to say what's the top 10 published papers in, say, cancer research, and likely the authors don't exist, the titles don't exist, and the publishing, the place it's been published to, the journals, probably don't exist either. So the way it's kind of been, the underlying semantics of the way this model's been developed has resulted in kind of a process, this kind of AI that speaks with really like confidence and truth, and really takes a human lens that isn't just kind of just eyeballing and assuming that things that it says, like when we go on Wikipedia, right, there's a kind of a blind peer review to be able to actually put information on there. There's a contribution process for Wikipedia, but there is a process that also kind of does catch anything that doesn't sound about right through the blind review process. And so we don't have any of those mechanisms or the safeguards right now in ChatGPT. So the way, businesses are going to apply these things, I think it's, there's a sensitivity there around definitely lean in. The world is kind of, AI is kind of at a forefront at the moment of kind of possibility, and there's no reason to kind of see how that might be able to be used in your business. But definitely be very, very conscious of kind of how you want to use that. And then some of the real implications for somewhere like the FT is the copyright issues, the sensitivity, anything that you put on, say, ChatGPT, for example. If you're going to use OpenAI's ChatGPT, that information becomes available in the public domain. So you need to be quite sensitive around what you're kind of using that. If you want to go away and build your own large language model, you might build that internally, but you need a lot of compute power to be able to do it. So we're in this really interesting space at the moment, and hopefully I won't kind of hear this back in 6 months' time and kick myself and think, oh, what did I say that? What was I talking about? I should have said this instead. But I think the biggest thing that I can say at the moment is that there's a huge ethics consideration and the kind of the impact to actually people that are not practitioners or not professionals or not very cognizant of how things are built in this space. We need to really help them understand how things have been built, because I think it's a bit unfair that we're in this situation where OpenAI have democratized this type of machine learning model and said, hey, everybody go away and play with it, have fun, but not really also held up the other end of the bargain, which is, well, here's how it's kind of been built, and here's some of the safeguards that should go with when you want to play with something like this. I think we'll get there, but I always feel like the safeguards come after the like big shiny thing to go away and play with.
Yeah, move fast, break things. It's still the motto probably in many places. But yeah, despite it is a bit ironic that despite the name, OpenAI's models are still quite closed source, and you don't really know what's happening under the hood. And I think, it becomes problematic, particularly maybe for a media publication, that if you use ChatGPT or other similar kind of large language models, and most of the responses, most of the information, 95% of it will probably be harmless, kind of useful responses to your queries, but then some edge cases will probably not be. And then the issue is that you, from that 95% of useful answers, you kind of get to build a lot of trust into the model. So you assume that anything that it's going to output will be valid and correct. So then those 5% edge cases can become extremely problematic, again, particularly for maybe a media publication like the Financial Times, who might be seen to take a bias or other different things.
Absolutely. It's going to be an interesting space, and it's definitely very topical for us at the moment. And so I don't have any answers in terms of what the FT is going to do, but I definitely know the things that we're massively considering, and how do we make sure that we're having a very responsible and ethical stance at the very forefront of that.
That's really interesting. How do you think skills will be impacted by kind of the increasing prevalence of large language models that seem to start to automate a lot of aspects of jobs?
Yeah, so we always have these like big headlines, right? Robots are going to take everybody's jobs, and I think that's been happening in kind of the AI data science space for a while. I would definitely say again we're at that another buzz hype point. Definitely is. There's no way that ChatGPT can be done without human in the loop. There's some applications, right? But you're still gonna need that, whether it be creative or statistical eye, or in very inspectful eye over kind of what ChatGPT does. So I think the nature of the phrasing is, what does this free me up to do better, right? So the translation piece, it doesn't mean we're never going to need translators, of course, but what it does mean is that translators don't have to spend their time, translating something, a very basic sentence, but can focus much more on the intuition around language around, how do you make sarcasm in English sound the same in Spanish? That's a really difficult, very niche challenge. And I think hopefully most people working in that space, that's one that they want to be solving, not the kind of the very basic kind of just direct translation from X to X. And, we've already got capabilities in the likes of that of Google Translate. It's just that kind of the capabilities within some of the GPT and the large language models untap some of that even more. And, we've been doing a lot of this kind of translation stuff in the machine learning space with kind of long-term short memory, allowed us to untap a lot of this capability a few years ago and get a lot better at translation, for example. So that's one example where I'm saying it's already been happening for a while, and people that are working in the space realize that it's just there's a nature shift in the type of activity that you do, and hopefully it means that we're all freed up a little bit to use the minds in the way that we want to be using. I think nobody, in 100 years' time, wouldn't it be lovely if people don't have to be working, the traditional 9 to 5, and they're freed up to do much more creative things, because actually the basic kind of basic capability, sometimes the things that we have to focus on, like copying and pasting things from a spreadsheet, is like much more like, it's automated processes. And so therefore we're freed up to do a lot more kind of the application, and then you can do things in maybe shorter spaces of time. I think there's a lot there that I think we'll see that transformation happen, but I definitely don't think it's a case of suddenly we're all going to be not in our jobs anymore. And that's proven right by things like GitHub Copilot. Engineers are definitely not out of their job by a long shot. What it means is that they're like just way more efficient, and they can do a lot more in the time that they have.
Yeah, absolutely. And in the case of GitHub Copilot, I think I've seen that it's actually more beneficial for senior developers, because they're actually more used to reading code, so they can actually just go through a few different examples and template very quickly and decide which one they want to go for. Switching gears a little bit, what's the data science culture like at FT compared to the previous companies that you've been in?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I'm really, really proud of kind of the inclusivity of our team. We have 64% of our team are identify as women, and then I've got a number of. I've also got my team split between London and Sofia, Bulgaria, and we've also got a number of career switchers in our team as well. So people who have done different kind of career before making a switch into data science. That brings back to our point earlier around kind of having those different perspectives, having those different thoughts around approaches in data science. That really brings a different viewpoint. I think there's a lot to be said about the FT as a whole in terms of our culture and what we value, and inclusivity is very, very at the heart of that. Coupled with kind of some of our journalistic values, be very much running through our whole business. So trustworthy, independent, honest, and very having a lot of integrity, and you see a lot of that resonate in all of the teams across the FT. And I think what that really means in our team is we want to be able to build the right things for the right reasons, but also in a way that's allows lots of different thoughts, lots of different processes. And so where I've worked previously for, say, more value-driven organizations, where kind of a lot of the decision making was very much about the bottom line, and I'm constantly having to justify why we were doing certain things in data science to try and help that bottom line. Here it's a slightly different language that we use in terms of kind of the projects that we're working on and why they're important, and the strategic goals that they stack up to for the FT. Obviously, FT is still a commercial organization, but our goals and our aspirations as a business look slightly different. And so it's this real, we've got this real warm place where we're able to kind of curate spaces for people to have that freedom to kind of really challenge approaches, have the time as well, because there's a bit there around, like, if you're constantly running at 100 miles an hour to get things delivered, you never have time to step back and say, hey, is this the right thing that we should be working on? So there's a bit around that. And then, next week my team is over from Sofia to London, and we're doing a whole bunch of different activities. We're off bouldering in one of the afternoons, and then we're off to see a news media exhibition at the Tate. So we like getting together and doing something slightly different.
Nice. And in terms of, do you hire early career data scientists?
Yeah, so we have a number of data scientists in our team who it's been their first role out of university, and we have a really good trajectory in terms of upskilling those roles into senior roles, and also beyond. So we do have somebody in my team who started at the FT as a data scientist after she completed her PhD, and she has had a really great she's delivered a lot of great quality work for us at the FT, and ended up with a senior position, and then now as a lead data scientist reporting into me. So we have a really good kind of internal promotion pathway. We're trying to carve out a bit more of a definition for junior data science roles at the moment. I still have a very small, lean team. So I have a total team of 13, which is 11 data scientists and 2 engineers. And that means that there's only so much that we can do, because we're not like a huge team in terms of kind of opportunities and development. But where they exist, we kind of have this lovely way of being able to bring people up from data scientists to senior. And if you want to focus on more technical individual contribution, or if you want to go down on more of a line management path, and then up to lead, and then all being well kind of into that data science manager or principal role underneath director. And so what we're trying to introduce is more of that junior path to carve that out, where we've hired a number of people out of once they finished, say, either like a degree or an apprenticeship program, or it's their first role coming into the data science field. But yeah, a number of our data scientists, it's their first role in data science. So it's really great, because we have a lot of good systems. I can't take credit for this, because I've only been there since, I've actually been there coming up 2 years, so July 2021. But we have a lot of kind of good processing and documentation in place, and obviously that all needs kind of maintaining. But for kind of getting people up to speed with how we work, we've so far, touch wood, had a bit of a good run with that. So a good environment, even though we don't have like a traditional grad program or anything like that.
Sounds like a great environment. So then, if I would join as a junior data scientist, what would my work look like? What would I be doing?
Yeah, so you get stuck straight in on one of our project squads. So, for example, if you were to join us tomorrow, you might be working on, we've got 2 recommendation models that we're building at the moment, one for something around our professional workspace, and one more around our on-site experience. So you'd be embedded into one of those. So you'd be learning a lot about recommendation models if you're not familiar with them already. So what's the difference between content versus collaborative filtering, and how does that work, and what was the one we're going to apply? You'd be working in probably a team of at least 3 data scientists, with one of them being the project lead, and you'd be getting straight stuck in kind of with stand-ups every day about what's going to be worked on, planning every couple of weeks about what needs to be done in, say, the sprint. So that might be like the 2 weeks of work that you're going to do next, and that might be that you go away and you grab a number of our content, so our articles, and you might need to parse that and do some exploratory data analysis to understand how we're going to build this recommendation. And you might do some exploring around what machine learning method should you apply from a recommendation stance. And then you'd actually be responsible with the team for building that model. And you'd also get the chance to be working very closely with the stakeholders. So we work very closely with our product managers in whichever area we're working on. So understanding exactly how, once that model's been built, how's it going to get exposed to the business, how's it going to get consumed, so that we can start thinking straight away about how we're going to be able to maintain that. Because as a junior data scientist, you're also going to have to start thinking about how does that get maintained, not by yourself, but as part of the team. How does that feed into kind of how we support all of the different models that we're serving the business all the time? And also, how are we going to evaluate the success of that model? So you'll be kind of responsible for scoping with the project lead to think about, okay, so once it is on the website or on the on-site in the app or served through a push notification, how are we actually going to monitor the success so we know whether or not this model is actually performing properly? So that's, you get stuck in pretty much straight away. We're very much operating in an R environment at the moment. So our major language that we use for building models is R, but we also have a number of models that we are starting to write in Python. And you'd also be exposed at the moment to some of the new capabilities we're building in terms of our machine learning operations and our new engineering and infrastructure kind of ways of doing things, so that our models are a little bit more scalable and making sure that they can support the business areas we need to. So lots of new workshops happening at the moment.
Sounds super exciting. So just to make sure we're on the same page, that's a formal job offer for me tomorrow.
I mean, you might have to go through a few little recruitment process, but yeah. And I'm more than happy to share a little bit about our recruitment process if that's useful for folks listening.
Please do, yeah. That'd be the next question.
Yeah, so if you were to apply for us, Alex, which I'm sure you would absolutely nail the process, it would be a case that we do a blind CV screening. So that's the first stage, and so again, back to that kind of inclusivity at the heart of the FT, and that resonates through our hiring process, our talent acquisition. Really focus on having a very diverse upfront pool, because what you find is that as you go through the process, if you haven't got that really diverse pool up front, then the inclusivity of the candidates you've got left isn't necessarily as diverse perhaps as you might have initially wanted. So we work really close with talent acquisition to help us do that. And then we have a process where we do some blind questions. So candidates will be asked maybe to spend 20 minutes or 30 minutes just to answer some questions offline, and that we then kind of review in a blind way to support that. And then it goes through to a application process where you have both a competency and a technical interview. I'm not going to disclose any more about that, but those are roughly 45 minutes to an hour, and we try and put those together so that it's not too long. And then all being well, at the end of that process, you'll get to meet with me, which is a little bit less formal and a bit more of an enjoyable conversation where I can chat a little bit about the kind of aspiration, the vision for the team, and what you'll be doing from kind of day one to say day 1000, all being well. So yeah.
So Alex is going to brush up on his R skills, and then you'll get a CV soon.
Yeah, I'll just learn everything from scratch by tomorrow. No problem.
There's a data science boot camp for that, right?
So just to wrap things up, what advice, any tips, words of wisdom you would like to share with students looking to break into data science now?
Be yourself. Be very authentic. I think it's becoming more acceptable to be your authentic self when you're looking for new opportunities. It's hard to find something that you actually feel passionate about and want to do, but try and prioritize that even when kind of the job market is quite difficult. I think passion really does make a difference, even if you can just find something, whether that be that creative outlet or it be an area that you have interest in. And then my final advice is make mistakes. It's absolutely fine. People's career paths are very curvy. They're very non-linear. Everybody makes mistakes, and you will learn way more from them than you do from being a perfect success every single step of the way. So feel free to find somewhere that you can make those mistakes and you feel empowered to make them, so you can learn more.
Awesome.
Beautiful. Yeah.
Anything else you'd like to shout out, to share with our audience?
No, just a big thanks to, I guess, my team and at the FG Data Science, who make it such a pleasurable place to work and make me smile all the time. And therefore, when I do get to talk about my team, I get to have this big smile on my face. And thanks to you both for having me on. It's been really, really lovely.
Yeah, I think that comes across really well. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us, Leanne. It was lovely, very interesting and insightful conversation. Hopefully we'll have you back soon.
No, thanks so much. And let's hope that the things I said about ChatGPT don't come back to bite me. I have to do some interesting edits there with the dog and the whole, the lack of recording. I look forward to seeing how it turns out. I'm hoping it works okay.
Oh yeah, it's gonna be amazing. And we'll schedule another one in 6 months' time just to review the ChatGPT forecast.
Yeah, I can pick myself. All right.
Okay. Well, thanks again, Leanne. See you soon.
Thanks so much. Cheers. Thanks.